Assalamu alaikum. Lecture 10, and it is the last lecture of the renal system. What is the innervation of the bladder? The bladder has three types of the nerves: pelvic nerves, pudendal, and hypogastric nerves. First of all, we will talk about the pelvic nerves, which are the principal nerves supply the bladder, which connect with the spinal cord through the sacral plexus S2 and S3 segments. The pelvic nerves contain both sensory and motor fibers, which is so important point. Pelvic nerves contain both sensory and motor nerve fibers. The sensory fibers detect the degree of the stretching in the bladder wall. The most powerful are the stretch signals from the posterior urethra, which are responsible for initiating the micturition reflex. The motor nerves of this reflex are parasympathetic fiber, which terminate on the ganglion cells located in the wall of the bladder. Then short postganglionic nerve, then it will innervate the detrusal muscle, which leading to contraction of the detrusal muscle. النيرف الثاني هو البيودندال nerve, which contain the skeletal or somatic motor fibers and which is responsible to innervate and control the voluntary skeletal muscle of the external bladder sphincter. Finally, the hypogastric nerves. Hypogastric nerve are sympathetic fibers pass from the lumbar 2 segment of the spinal cord to the sympathetic chain to innervate bladder. وين بتروح بالضبط بالبلادر؟ They stimulate mainly the blood vessels. They stimulate mainly the blood vessels، يعني مسؤولة عن ال contraction and the relaxation of the blood vessels and have little to do with the bladder contraction. There is some sensory nerve fiber also pass by the way of the sympathetic nerve, which are important for sensation of fullness and pain. This picture for discuss the innervation of the bladder. This is the parasympathetic part of the micturition reflex of the pudendal nerve from the S2, see from the S2 and from the S3, which is supply and innervated the detrusal muscle, responsible for contraction of the detrusal muscle. This is the pudendal nerve, which is contain the skeletal or somatic motor fiber, which is supply the external sphincter, external bladder sphincter. See? And this is the sympathetic, and this is the hypogastric nerve, which is connect with the sympathetic chain and then supply the bladder, especially the blood vessels of the bladder. Okay. The transport of the urine from the kidney to the bladder through the ureters. عادة الurine has the same composition of the fluid, which is flow out the collecting duct. And once the urine flow out from the collecting duct and reach the renal calyces, lead to the renal calyces stretching. And once the renal calyces stretch, that lead to increase their inherent pacemaker activity. هي بها as a pacemaker لما يصير بها stretching راح تزيد هذه activity of this pacemaker, leading to initiate a peristaltic contraction that will spread to the renal pelvic and then downward along the length of the ureters. Thereby, this lead to the pushing the urine from the renal pelvis toward the bladder. The wall of the ureters contain smooth muscle, which are innervated by both sympathetic and parasympathetic nerves. مهمة, it's supplied by the sympathetic and parasympathetic nerves, as well as by intramural plexus of neuron and nerve fibers that extend along the entire length of the ureters. The peristaltic contraction in the ureter as are enhanced by parasympathetic stimulation and inhibited by the sympathetic stimulation, which is so important in the type of the drugs which used in the treatment. Normally, the detrusal muscle has its own normal tone that lead to compress the ureter, especially the part of the ureter which passes through it. This lead to preventing of the urine pass. Pass back from the bladder to the ureter when there is an increase the pressure inside the bladder during micturition. ولكن with each peristaltic wave along the ureter lead to this peristaltic wave lead to increase the pressure within the ureter, so that lead to open the ureter region that passing through the bladder wall. Okay, and this allowing the urine to flow into bladder from the ureter. The ureterorenal reflex, from its name, it start at the ureter and end to the kidney. It is important reflex occur when there is a ureter become blocked by the urethral stone or urethral tumor. This lead to the intense reflex constriction of the ureter will occur, associated with the severe pain, because the ureter is supplied with the pain nerve fibers as well. This pain impulse cause a sympathetic reflex back to the kidney, lead to constriction of the renal arterioles and decreasing the urine output from the kidney when there is a blocked ureter. وهذه نعمة من رب العالمين علينا، لأنه في حالة لما يصير blocking of the ureter راح يقل اليورين collection above the blocking at the ureter. فلأنه لو كان يتجمع اليورين كثير فوق البلوكينج اريا كان يصير باك بريشر على الكدني ويعمل لنا destruction of the kidney. Micturition. What is micturition? It is the process by which the urinary bladder empties when it becomes filled. This involves two main steps. First of all, the bladder fills progressively until the tension in its wall rises above the threshold level. This elicitates the second step, which is the nervous reflex, which called micturition reflex. The cystometrogram هي عملية رسم pressure inside the bladder. The basal intravesicular pressure عادة it's about 0 when there is no urine collection in the bladder. But by the time when the urine collected about 30 to 50 milliliter of the urine, the pressure inside the bladder will increase to about 5 up to 10 centimeter of water. Then if the urine collection about 200 up to 3 milliliter inside the bladder, only this lead to only a small rise in the basal intravesicular pressure. Why? This is caused due to the intrinsic tone of the bladder wall, which is called plasticity, because when the bladder fills, the tension inside it increase, but at the same time the radius increase as well. ولهذا ما حيزيد البريشر inside the bladder. مثل البومبلي من تملي ماي راح يزيد القطر مالتها as well. Beyond the 300 up to 400 milliliter of urine collection in the bladder, this lead to the increase the basal intravesicular pressure rapidly. Okay, at this time the basal intravesicular pressure will rise rapidly. This is what called cystometrogram. When there is a collection of urine 0 inside the bladder, the intravesicular pressure will be 0 as well. Once when there is collection of urine about 30 to 50 milliliter of urine, the intravesicular pressure increase to about 5 up to 10 centimeter of water. When there is more correction of urine to about 200 up to 300 milliliter of urine, there is a slight increase in the intravesicular pressure. Slight increase in the intravesicular pressure. But once there is collection of urine beyond 300 and or beyond 400 milliliter of urine, there is a rise in the intravesicular pressure rapidly. See, beyond 300 and beyond 400 milliliter of urine correction, there is a rise in the intravesicular pressure rapidly. The micturition waves, or we can say micturition contraction. What are their characteristic? They are the periodic, acute, superimposed increases in the intravesicular pressure that last from a few seconds to more than a minute during filling of the bladder. Also, this micturition wave may rise only a few centimeters of water up to more than 100 centimeters of water. The micturition wave caused by the micturition reflex. Okay, this is the micturition wave dashed line micturition wave. اشني الكاركترستيك مالتها؟ it is periodic، يعني كل شوية تحصل مرة أخرى. زين. acute تجينا sharp هالشكل حادة. زين. superimposed increase in the intravesicular pressure، لأنه إحنا عندنا basal intravesicular pressure هذا، ف superimposed يعني فد شيء أكو baseline ويجينه أزيد يصير، هو هذا نسمينه superimposed increase in the intravesicular pressure. Okay, the duration of it lasts from a few seconds up to more than a minute. زين. the duration لما تحصل ايش قد تطول from a few seconds up to more than 1 minute. زين. ايضا اللينث مالتها of the micturition wave هي either only a few centimeter of water. زين. and ممكن تزيد كثير up to 100 centimeter of water. طبعا الزيادة مالتها كلما يكثر ال collection of urine in the bladder راح يزيد اللينث مالتها، وإضافة أنه يزيد اللينث مالتها حتكون more frequent، راح تكون متقاربة أكثر. What is the micturition reflex? It is the contraction of the detrustal muscle and micturition wave occur due to the stretch reflexes which initiated by the sensory stretch receptor in the bladder wall, especially مثل ما قلنا in the receptor at the posterior urethra when this area begin to fill with the urine at the higher bladder pressure. The first air to void هاي مهمة is filled at the bladder volume of about 150 milliliter of urine, and a marked sense of fullness. It's also important as well. A marked sense of fullness occur at about 400 milliliter of urine. When the bladder is partially filled, this micturition contraction will cease، راح تتوقف spontaneously, and the bladder will relax after a fraction of minute, and the pressure fall back to the baseline. هناك نقطة مهمة أنه once a micturition reflexes begin it is self-regenerative، يعني من بدأ أول مرة راح يظل يعني يخمد ويرجع يخمد ويرجع إلى أن يصير لنا عملية اليورينيشن. Once micturition reflex has occurred but has not succeeded in emptying the bladder, the nervous element of this reflex usually will remain in an inhibited state مخمدة for a few minutes up to 1 hour or more before another micturition reflex occur. يعني أول ما تبدي الإحساس وإنه بالcontraction of the bladder إذا ما صار micturation راح يظل الشخص تقريبا few minutes إلى 1 hour or more without this sensation to micturation. As the bladder continues to fill, the micturation reflex become more frequent and cause greater contraction مثل ما قلنا. Once micturation reflex become powerful enough, it cause another reflex أيضا هاي مهمة which pass through the pudendal nerve to the external sphincter to inhibit it. مثل ما قلنا إنه البيودنتال نيرف يحتوي على skeletal motor nerve control the external sphincter. So if this inhibition is more potent in the brain than the voluntary constrictor signals to the external sphincter, then the urination will occur. If not, the urination will not occur until the bladder fills still further and the micturation reflex become more powerful. Facilitation or inhibition of the micturation by the brain. فقط نقطة واحدة حبيت أوصل لكم هي important at your level ما خضته more detail. عادة the micturation reflex is a completely autonomic spinal cord reflex. هاي مهمة وصلتكم هاي المعلومة. But it can be just inhibited or facilitated by the centers in the brain as pons and cerebral cortex. Voluntary urination. When the person decides to urinate voluntarily, it's usually initiated in the following way. First of all, a person voluntarily contracts his or her abdominal muscle, which lead to increase the pressure in the bladder and allow extra urine to enter the bladder neck and posterior urethra under the pressure, thus stretching their walls. This stimulates the stretch receptors, which initiate the micturation reflex and at the same time inhibit the external urethral sphincter. عادة all the urine will empty rarely more than 5 to 10 milliliter left in the bladder. Thank you. لهون انتهت محاضرات الرينال وأشعكم إن شاء الله محاضرات الأسيد بيس بالانس. بالتوفيق إن شاء الله.